Let's do some drywall. Hello everybody, today we're going to be skimming out a ceiling. They have a really rough texture on this, so what we got called in to do was just to skim it out and do a better Santa Fe texture. Out here, Santa Fe textures are basically like a smooth wall, but there's some imperfections. They call them voids, skip trowel voids in between. With this, we're doing like what you would call a 90% Santa Fe or 95%. That just means it's 95% smooth with 5% of these skip trowel voids in and there. So you're not really skim coating everything on the texture. You're kind of doing like a skip trowel, and then you're troweling it down to leave some void skips here and there. The texture right now is like what you call a 50-50. It's 50% voids, 50% smooth Santa Fe. So it's just the type of texture that's out here. Depending on your region, you probably have a different name for it, but it's just skim coating. But what I'm going to do first here is we're going to get the room all masked off. I don't want to get a bunch of mud caked on the walls because we are skimming overhead with thinner mud, so it does make a big mess. I don't want to sit here and scrape mud off the walls. The walls are already painted. So get everything masked off. I'm going to run some tape in the angle because I don't want to slop up the angle. The angles are already nice and square, so I'm going to keep the materials thinner next to the angles. I'm going to be skim coating with a 45-minute mud. I recommend if you never mudded before, just stick to regular joint compounds, all-purpose joint compounds for skimming. These hot muds are more professional grade material. They do set up. It takes more effort in the mixing them up, cleaning it up, using the material. So you can make a lot more mistakes with hot muds if you don't know what you're doing. I'm using a hot mud because I have to get this job completed in one trip. Completed means skimmed out, let it dry, and then texture it all out and cleaned up all in one trip because I couldn't come back and forth to these jobs several times. But basically, going to get it all mixed up. You're going to mix a bucket of this stuff. You always want to use fresh, clean water. I'm mixing it up fairly thick, but I don't want it really thin. I don't want to make a big mess, but if you make the mud really thick, it's going to be really hard to try to skim coat using a bigger knife. So you want to kind of, I would say, like a thinner bread dough consistency. And you want to mix it up thoroughly. You don't want no clumps in your mud. Same with the joint compound. You want to mix it up good. You don't want to just scoop the stuff right out of the box. You want to mix it up, whip it up. You want a nice whipped material with no clumps and bumps in it. If there's stuff in your mud, you're going to have to strain it. You don't want to skim coat with stuff pulling scratches and getting debris in it. I'm using some stilts on this job because I don't like going up and down ladders all day on ceiling work. So that's why I'm helping a buddy here. I'm using stilts because he doesn't like to do stilt work. I don't blame him. I don't like to use them either. But on this, it calls for stilt works. I'm also using my new 18-inch knife. I just got this. So I still got to break it in, but it works pretty good for this skim coating. I'm going to use an 18-inch knife to skim coat everything out with a heavy hot mud. Some of the dips and waves in the ceiling, I'm going to have to kind of float them out. So I'm not doing a really tight skim. If your texture wasn't terrible, you can get away with doing a real tight skim coat and then maybe follow through with a second tight skim coat. Also here was a seam repair. So I'm fixing the seam, coating all this fiberglass mesh tape that we did over the peeling seam. I'm just going to go through, get everything skim coated. This ceiling is going to actually use almost 2 bags of hot mud. So we're going to get it all skim coated. Once it's all skim coated, I'm going to let it set up. It's a 45 minute, so it's 45 minutes on a painted ceiling, so it takes a little longer to dry. No hurry. I don't like to rush with these hot muds when I'm doing skim jobs because I like to get the materials on. I like to get off my stilts. I like to wash out my pans, my knives, the mixing tools. I like to get everything cleaned up and out of there, and gives me a minute to get everything cleaned up, grab a drink of water, take a 5-minute break, and then come in and take a look at it. After it starts setting up with hot muds, I'm going to have to go through and do a slick out process. Since I kind of skimmed it somewhat tight, there's not a lot of lap marks, so I just got to get rid of the lap marks and then any rough areas, and then of course my repair area, I'm going to have to do another tight coat on it. If your skim coat was really rough, you'd have to follow through and do a tight second coat over it. If you use the joint compounds, you might want to just go through after the next day after the joint compounds dry and maybe do a light sanding. I don't like to do a lot of sanding with joint compounds when I'm doing skimming walls, because then you're just going to create a bunch of dust on the walls. And then if you touch up and mud over the dusty drywall, you're going to get bubbles. So if you do sand, you're going to have to try to maybe take a damp sponge, get rid of some of the dust and all that. So sometimes if it's a tight skim job, you can get away with just scraping everything with your knife, getting rid of any lap marks, stuff like that, and then just go through and touch up everything. But after I get all this coated out, skimmed out, I'm going to let it dry. I'm going to slick it out. I'm going to touch up everything. And then I'm going to follow through with my other 18-inch knife. This is my Santa Fe knife. It's not as stiff as the first knife I used, so it gives us some flexibility to do a nice Santa Fe on here. And you're going to notice how you do the Santa Fe. I kind of skip it on and then I trowel it down. You are going to have lap marks here and there. That's normal. Lap marks are normal. Cut knife marks are not normal. You can sand away a lap mark, but you can't get rid of a big heavy knife mark, gouge that you create from doing the knives. So you're always going to get lap marks. That's no problem. You can sand them out before you primer and paint. Sometimes if they're minimal, you won't even see them after everything sets up and dries. But basically, this is the same process if you would do on walls, ceilings. If you had ugly texture you didn't like, you're going to have to just skim out everything and start over with a blank, smooth canvas. This is the kind of texture I have in my own house, my personal house. I skim coated all my walls out, 2 coats, and then I did a smooth Santa Fe like this. It's not perfectly smooth. Sometimes with perfectly smooth walls, you're going to notice any imperfections. So these Santa Fe textures are nice because there are some imperfections here and there. So you're not constantly staring at your walls and ceilings and noticing every little imperfection, because the voids in the Santa Fe are part of the texture. Also, once you get it all textured, you let your texture dry overnight or so. Then you can also go through and lightly sand everything. I recommend with these Santa Fe smoother textures, use like 180 grit to 220 grit sandpaper. You don't want to grind them down. You're just kind of going over everything. And that's if you're a perfectionist. You want perfectly smooth wall. Well, instead of doing a Santa Fe texture, you're going to just have to skim everything tight and maybe do 3 coats to get your smooth wall appearance with a lot of sanding in between coats. But yeah, just follow along. The video's kind of long. I don't have no noise going because I was listening to the radio in the background. I don't want to get no copyright things for music and stuff. So it's just kind of a watch and learn how I do skim outs on ceilings. Easy to do. Maybe you want to do a skim out on your job, your property. It's probably easier just to start on a wall, maybe like a closet wall or a wall no one will see, and practice on that until you get comfortable doing something that's going to be seen by everybody else. But with this, always use a joint compound. Hot muds, like I said, are more professional grade material. If you're in no hurry, just use a standard all-purpose joint compound. With joint compounds, they dry overnight, so you have to let them dry overnight before you can do any sanding or second coat. But with the joint compounds, if you make a mistake, you can sand away your mistakes. With these hot muds, once they set up like a cement. So you get what you pay for here with these hot muds. So you got to really work with these hot muds. That's why it's more professional grade material. Joint compounds are easier to work with because it's basically just gypsum, mud, and glue. So you can sand away any mistakes you make. But I hope you like this video. It's pretty simple. I'm just skimming out. This job took me almost, I'd say about 3-4 hours up and down the stilts. And this was just done by myself, basically. The only time you see my help, he just drops off a bag of mud and he runs away, because he always does that when he sees a big job going along. He just disappears all of a sudden, then he shows up at the end to take credit for all my hard work and labor. But that's how it is when you have work with people or have people work with you. You end up doing most of the work while they just sit back and watch. I hope you like this video. Please leave a comment. Please like, share, and I hope you like it. But this is my process skimming out. Of course, everybody has their own way of doing things. This is my way of doing things. I work every day. I hurt at night because I do it every day. So I got the pains and I got the mud on my face to prove it. Now I'm going to be doing a Santa Fe texture. I'm just using a joint compound, or you can use a topping. This is more of a topping type material. Topping just means there's not a lot of glue in the joint compounds. So it's easier to sand. It's easier to work with. It gives it a creamier finish. So I like to do the toppings with these smooth coats or these Santa Fe coats. But I'm just putting it on. I'm using my big 18-inch knife. Of course, I don't expect someone just to pick up an 18-inch knife and use it. I like to use it on these ceilings like this because I can cover a lot of ground, square footage. And I'm just putting on basically my full pan, kind of like a skip trowel, and then I'm just troweling it down. I'm keeping the angles nice and clean. I don't want a big old knife mark glump of mud in the angles. When I first started doing drywall a long time ago, we used to have to texture whole houses, large houses, sometimes 20, 25-foot ceiling custom homes. And we would have to do a Santa Fe texture in probably a 300 sheet house in one day or more. So we really had to make ground with these Santa Fe's, doing custom homes. So I'm pretty good at it. Not as best as I used to be because I've been doing this for 25 years, so I don't move as fast as I used to. But I can still do some damage here with this big 18-inch knife. Santa Fe, I'm just trucking along. And it just takes practice doing this. You're always going to get lap marks, but it's just most of knife work. I always have other guys that think they're really good at mudding. Sure, everybody's good at mudding, but when you get to production work, they'll put you up against me and watch me work. Do a lot of damage with the Santa Fe textures, skip trowel textures, cover sheets, 100 sheets, 200 sheets. We can do 1,000 sheets a day if need be, if the money's right. But we mostly do just these repair work, so easy sealing like this is more than enough work for one guy to do on himself. Get it all Santa Fe'd pretty easy. You let this Santa Fe dry for at least 24 hours. And like I said, just you can lightly sand it, and then always primer. Always primer drywall. Even the smallest nail hole, you need to use a primer. Either a PVA drywall sealer, or you can even use a Kills 2 latex. Always primer new drywall after you sand it. That way the primer seals up the pores of the mud. So if you go to paint without primers, you're going to soak up gallons and gallons of paint. Paint has moisture in it. Mud likes to absorb moisture. So when you have big areas where there's repair, where it's really thick in mud, it's going to soak up more paint. So you use a primer on drywall, and then it just seals up the pores and the absorption of the drywall. So when you go to paint, the paint just goes on cosmetically. It doesn't try to absorb here, absorb there, and then cause flashing. They call it flashing when it soaks up in the certain spots more than others. So always use a primer on all your drywall repairs, big or small. But pretty simple, easy video. Skimming out a ceiling, same process to skim out walls, clean up walls, make them more modern, give it a smoother finish. Easy to do. Once you learn how to do it, you can go ahead and start skimming out walls in your house. A lot of people will call me to skim out their whole houses. I don't do that anymore because it is a big job. It's easier just to concentrate at one wall or one ceiling at a time, or one room at a time. Don't try to do your whole house at once because it's going to be a big, messy project. Lots of dust, lots of mud involved. So it's easier just to concentrate on one wall or one room at a time. Get it all skim coated, cleaned up, painted, move on to the next room. I hope this video was helpful. Got plenty of other videos on my channel. Drywall repairs, patching, stress cracks. I try to make videos when I can. I don't always have the camera available. I do work 7 days a week. So I try to make videos when I can, when there's not people involved, homeowners over my shoulder. Whenever I have time, I'll try to make videos as best as I can. I don't have a cameraman, so it's just me and my little camera and my pan and knife and a box of mud showing you these videos. Hey, thank you, and thanks for subscribing.